Hello everyone and welcome to the first instalment of Rebecca's Book Club. I'm Rebecca and the first book I've chosen for our book club is Temple by Matthew Reilly. This is, I think, his third book that he published, and it was published in about 1999, so it might be one that you've come across before, that you've enjoyed reading. It's certainly one that I've enjoyed a few times. I've read it maybe sort of 4 or 5 times, but I've picked it today because I think it's one that if you haven't read, I definitely would love you to read. It's got a really great fast pace on it. I think Matthew Reilly does a great job of intertwining two really well written plots throughout the whole book. So as you can see, it's quite a lengthy book, but it certainly is one that you don't want to end sort of by the time you get into it, and you get very addicted to all the characters. So yeah, this is my first ever stream. I'm very nervous, but I'll try my best to pronounce everything and not make too many mistakes as I'm reading to you. But as we go along, as you get invested in the characters in the book, then get involved in the chat, let me know what you think. It'll be really great to just have a discussion with you all about what you think about it. So not to waste any more time, we'll get started with reading. So, introduction. Chapter 1, The Consequences of Conquest. From Holston Mark J., Civilization Lost, The Conquest of the Incas, Advantage Press, New York, 1996. What cannot be emphasized enough is that the conquest of the Incas by the Spanish conquistadors represents perhaps the single greatest collision of cultures in the history of human evolution. There was the most dominant seafaring nation on Earth, bringing with it all the latest steel technology from Europe, clashing with the most powerful empire ever to have existed in the Americas. Unfortunately for historians, and thanks largely to the insatiable gold lust of Francisco Pizarro and his bloodthirsty conquistadors, the greatest empire to have inhabited the Americas is also the one about which we know the least. The plunder of the Incan Empire by Pizarro and his enemy of henchmen in 1532 must rank as one of the most brutal in written history. Armed with the most overwhelming of colonial weapons, gunpowder, the Spaniards cut a swathe through Incan towns and cities with a lack of principle that would have made Machiavelli shudder, to use the words of one 20th century commentator. Incan women were raped in their homes or forced to work in filthy makeshift brothels, men were routinely tortured, children were shipped to the coast by the hundred to be loaded onto the dreaded slave galleons and taken back to Europe. In the cities, temple walls were stripped bare, gold plates and holy idols were melted into bars before anyone even thought to inquire as to their cultural significance. Perhaps the most famous of all the tales of quests for Incan treasure is that of Hernando Pizarro, Francisco's brother, and his Herculean journey of the coastal town in search Cajamarca in search of a fabled Incan idol. From what little remains of the Incan Empire, buildings that the Spaniards did not destroy, golden relics that the Incas spirited away in the dead of night, the modern historian can only garner the barest of glimpses of a once great civilization. What emerges is an empire of paradox. The Incas did not have the wheel, and yet they built the most extensive road system ever seen in the Americas. They did not know how to smelt iron ore, yet their metalwork with other substances, in particular gold and silver, was second to none. They had no form of writing, and yet their system of numerical record-keeping, multicoloured string formations, known as quipus, was incredibly accurate. It is said that the Quipucamaicus The Empire's feared tax collectors would know even when something so small as a sandal went missing. Inevitably, however, the greatest record of everyday Incan life comes from the Spaniards. As Cortes had done in Mexico only 20 years previously, the conquistadors in Peru brought with them clergymen to spread the gospel to the heathen natives. Many of these monks and priests would ultimately return to Spain and commit what they saw to writing, and indeed, these manuscripts can still be found in monasteries around Europe, dated and intact. I think that introduction gives us a really good, sets the scene really well for where this book's going to take us. So I'm really excited to get started onto the full novel now. So, prologue. San Sebastian Abbey, high in the French Pyrenees, Friday, January 1st, 1999, 3:23 a.m. The young monk sobbed uncontrollably as the cold barrel of the gun was placed firmly against his temple. His shoulders shook, tears streamed down his cheeks. "For God's sake, Philippe," he said, "if you know where it is, tell them." Brother Philippe de Villiers knelt on the floor of the abbey's dining area with his hands clenched behind his head. To his left knelt Brother Maurice Dupont, the young monk with the gun to his head. To his right, the other 16. Jesuit monks who lived in the San Sebastian Abbey. All 18 of them were on their knees, lined up in a row. In front of de Villiers, and a little to his left, stood a man dressed in black combat fatigues and armed with a Glock 18 automatic pistol and a Heckler & Koch G11 assault rifle, the most advanced assault rifle ever made. Right now, the black-clad man's Glock was resting against Maurice Dupont's head. A dozen other similarly garbed, similarly armed men stood around the wide dining room. They all wore black ski masks, and they were all waiting upon Philippe de Villiers' response to a very important question. "I don't know where it is," de Villiers said through clenched teeth. "Philippe," Maurice Dupont said. Without warning, the gun at Dupont's temple went off, a shot ringing out in silence of the near-deserted abbey. Dupont's head exploded like a watermelon, and a wash of blood spatters all over de Villiers' face. No one outside the abbey would hear the gunshot. The San Sebastian Abbey lay perched on a mountain top nearly 6,000 feet above sea level. Hidden among the snow-capped peaks of the French Pyrenees, it was as close as God as you could get, as some of the older monks liked to say. San Sebastian's nearest neighbour, the famous telescope platform, Pic du Midi Observatory, was nearly 20 kilometres away. The man with the Glock moved the monk on de Villiers' right and placed the barrel of the gun against his head. "Where is the manuscript?" the man with the gun asked de Villiers a second time. His Bavarian accent was strong. "I don't know, I tell you," de Villiers said. "Blam!" The second monk jolted backwards and smacked down against the floor, a puddle of red liquid fanning out from jagged, fleshy hole in his head. For a few seconds, the body shuddered involuntarily, spasming violently, and flopped against the floor like a fish that had fallen out of his bowl. Villiers shut his eyes, offered up a prayer. "Where is the manuscript?" the German said. "I don't—" Blam! Another monk fell. "Where is it?" "I don't know." Blam! All of a sudden, the Glock came around so it was now pointed directly at de Villiers' face. "This will be the last time I ask you this question, Brother de Villiers. Where is the Santiago manuscript?" De Villiers kept his eyes closed. "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy—" The German squeezed the trigger. "Wait!" someone said from the other end of the line. The German assassin turned and saw an older monk step up and out from the line of kneeling Jesuit monks. Please, no more, no more. I will tell you where the manuscript is if you promise you will kill no more." "Where is it?" the assassin said. "It is this way," the old monk said, heading off into the library. The assassin followed him into the adjoining room. Moments later, both men returned, the assassin carrying in his left hand a large leather-bound book. Although de Villiers couldn't see his face, it was clear that the German assassin was smiling broadly behind his black ski mask. "Now go, leave us in peace," the old Jesuit said. "Leave us to bury our dead." The assassin seemed to ponder that for a moment, then he turned and nodded to his cohorts. In response, the squad of armed assassins raised their G11s as one and opened fire on the line of kneeling monks. A devastating burst of super machine gun fire cut the remaining monks to ribbons. Heads exploded, jagged red rags of flesh were ripped clear from the monks' bodies as they were assailed by a force of gunfire never before witnessed. In seconds, all of the Jesuits were dead, save for one, the elderly monk who had brought the Germans the manuscript. He now stood alone in a pool of his comrades' blood, facing his tormentors. The lead assassin stepped forward and levelled his Glock at the old man's head. "Who are you?" the old monk said defiantly. This is where my pronunciations will not be very good, and I do apologise. "We are the Schutzstaffel, der Tottenkopfverband," the assassin said. The old monk's eyes went wide. "Good God," he breathed. The assassin smiled. "Not even he can save you now." Blam! The Glock went off one last time, and the assassin swept out of the abbey and into the night. A whole minute passed, then another. The abbey lay silent. The bodies of the 18 Jesuit brothers lay sprawled on the floor, bathed in blood. The assassins never saw it. It was high above them, hidden within the ceiling of the enormous dining room. It was a loft of some sort, an attic in the ceiling that was separated from the dining room by a thin, wood-panelled wall. The individual panels of the wall were so old and shriveled that the cracks between them were wide. If they had looked closely enough, the assassins would have seen it peering out through one of those cracks, blinking with fear. A wide-open, human eye. The one thing I do really love about Matthew Reilly's books is just how fast-paced it is and how really well detailed he's able to just paint a picture on the page. It flows so fast and you just want to devour page after page after page. So although it's a really, really gruesome opening to a book, it's just so enthralling. You need to know what this manuscript is. You need to know, what this group of assassins are, why they're there in this on this mountain. It's just so exciting. I can already feel my heart racing. So moving on. 3701 North Fairfax Drive, Arlington, Virginia. Offices of the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Monday, January 4th, 1999, 5:50 a.m. The thieves moved fast. They knew exactly where they were going. They'd picked the perfect time for the raid, 10 minutes to 6. 10 minutes before the night guards were due to clock off. 10 minutes before the day guards were due to clock on. The night guards would be tired, looking at their watches, looking forward to going home. They would be at their most vulnerable. 3701 North Fairfax Drive was an 8-storied red brick building just across the street from the Virginia Square Metro Station in Arlington, Virginia. It housed the offices of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, the cutting-edge research and development arm of the United States Department of Defense. The thieves ran down the white-lit corridors with their silenced MP5SD submachine guns held high, SEAL style, their folding socks pressed firmly against their shoulders, their eyes looking straight down their barrels, searching for targets. Thwat, 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 thwat. A hailstorm of silent bullets ripped down yet another Navy Guardsman, number 17. Without missing a beat, the thieves leapt over his body and headed for the vault room. One of them swiped the card key while another pushed open the huge hydraulic door. They were on the 3rd floor of the building, having already breached 7 Grade 5 security checkpoints that had required 4 different keycards and 6 different alphanumeric codes to open. They had entered the building via its underground loading dock, inside a van that had been expected. The underground gate guards had been the first to die. They had been followed soon after by the van's drivers. Up on the 3rd floor, the thieves hadn't stopped moving. In quick succession, they entered the vault room, an enormous lab chamber bounded on every side by 6-inch thick porcelain walls. Outside this porcelain cocoon was another outer wall. It was lead-lined and at least 12 inches thick. DARPA employees called this lab the Vault, and for good reason. Radio waves couldn't breach it, directional listening devices couldn't touch it. It was the most secure facility in the building, had been the most secure facility in the building. The thieves found out quickly as they came into the lab chamber. Silence, like the room, and then suddenly they stopped dead in their tracks. Their prize stood before them, occupying pride of place in the centre of the lab. It wasn't very big, despite what it could do. was maybe 6 feet tall, and it looked like a giant hourglass, two cones, the lower one pointing upwards, the upper one pointing downwards, separated by a small titanium chamber which held the core of the weapon. A collection of coloured wires snaked out from the titanium chamber in the centre of the device, most of them disappearing into a laptop computer keyboard that was crudely attached to its front section. For the moment, the small titanium chamber was empty. For the moment. The thieves didn't waste any time. They removed the entire device from its power generator and quickly placed it in a custom-made sling. Then they were moving again. Out the door, up the corridor, left then right, through the brightly lit government maze, stepping over the bodies they had killed on their way in. In the space of 90 seconds, they arrived back in the underground garage, where they all piled back into the van, together with their prize. No sooner was the last man's feet inside than the van's wheel skidded against the concrete and the big vehicle peeled away from the loading dock and sped out into the night. The team's leader looked at his watch, 5:59 a.m. The entire operation had taken 9 minutes. Nothing more, nothing less. Next chapter. Monday, January 4th, 09:10 hours. William Race was late for work, again. He'd overslept, and then the subway had been delayed, and now it was 10 after 9, and he was late for his morning lecture. Race's office was on the 3rd floor of the old Delaware building at New York University. The building had an ancient wrought iron elevator that travelled at a snail's pace, quicker to take the stairs. At 1:30, Race was one of the At 31, Race was one of the youngest members of staff in the Ancient Languages Department at New York University. He was of average height, about 5'9", and handsome in a very unassuming kind of way. I think now is maybe a good time just to put a little log on the fire. Bear with me. Right, okay. Thanks for bearing with me there, guys. So the fire's now back roaring away. Got my cup of tea. I hope you guys too do as well. And enjoy a nice relaxing read with a cup of tea is definitely the best way to spend a Sunday evening. So, where were we? Yeah. So we've just met William Race. He's this very unassuming professor at New York University, professor of ancient languages. So it's all getting very exciting now. I'm sure he's much better at pronouncing any of these Spanish words than I will be coming up, so I will do my best to do this book justice. He had sandy brown hair and a lean physique. A pair of wire-rimmed glasses framed his blue eyes, an unusual face mark, a triangular brown birthmark situated directly below his left eye. Grace hurried up the stairs, 1,000 thoughts running through his mind. His morning lecture on the works of Roman history, works on the Roman historian Livy, the parking fine from last month that he still had to pay, and the article that he'd read in New York Times that morning saying that because 85% of people base their ATM numbers on important dates like birthdays and the like, thieves who stole their wallets, thus obtaining not only ATM cards but also driver's license containing the owner's date of birth, were finding it easier to break into their bank accounts. Damn it, Race thought, he was going to have to change his PIN number. He came to the top of the stairwell and hurried out into the corridor, and then he stopped. 2 men were stood in the hallway in front of him, soldiers. They were decked out in full battle dress too. Helmets, body armour, M16s the lot. One stood halfway down the corridor nearer to Race, the other was stationed further down the hall. He stood rigidly to attention outside the door to Race's office. They couldn't have looked more out of place, soldiers in a university. Both men snapped around immediately, for when they saw him burst out from the stairwell, for some reason, in their presence, Ray suddenly felt inferior, somehow unworthy, undisciplined. He felt stupid in his Macy's sports coat, jeans, and a tie, carrying his clothes for a lunchtime baseball game in a battered old Nike sports bag. As he approached the first soldier, Race looked him up and down and saw the black assault rifle in his hands, saw the velvet green beret slouched on his head, saw the crescent-shaped patch on his shoulder that read Special Forces. Hi, I'm William Race. It's okay, Professor Race. Please go in. They're expecting you. Race continued down the corridor, came to the second soldier, who's taller than the first one. Bigger, in fact. He was huge, a mountain of a man, at least 6'4", with a soft, handsome face, dark hair, and narrow brown eyes that didn't miss a trick. The name patch on his breast pocket read Van Leeuwen. The 3 stripes on his shoulder indicated he was a sergeant. Race's eyes drifted to the man's M16. It had a state-of-the-art PAC-4C laser sighting device mounted on its barrel and an M203 grenade launcher attached to its underside. Serious stuff. The soldier stepped aside promptly, allowed Race to enter his own office. Dr. John Bernstein was sitting in the high-backed leather chair behind Race's desk, looking very uncomfortable. Bernstein was a white-haired man of 59 and the head of Ancient Languages Department at New York University, Race's boss. There were 3 other men in the room, 2 soldiers, 1 civilian. The 2 soldiers were dressed and armed in much the same manner as the guards outside, fatigues, helmets, laser-sighted M16s, and they both looked extremely fit. One appeared to be a little older than the other. He held his helmet formally, wedged firmly between his elbow and his ribs, and he had close-cropped black hair that barely reached his forehead. Race's sandy brown hair fell constantly down into his eyes. The third stranger in the room, the civilian, was seated in the guest's chair in front of Bernstein. He was a big man, barrel-chested and dressed in shirt sleeves and trousers. He had a pug nose and dark, heavy-set features that were weathered with age and responsibility, and he sat in his chair with the calm assurance of someone who is used to being obeyed. Race got the distinct impression that everyone had been waiting in his office for some time. Waiting for him. Will, John Bernstein said, coming around the desk and shaking his hand. Good morning, come on in. I'd like you to meet someone, Professor William Race, Colonel Frank Nash. The barrel-chested civilian extended his hand. Strong grip. Retired. Good to meet you, he said, looking Race over, then indicated the 2 soldiers. This is Captain Scott and Corporal Cochrane of the US Army Special Forces Group. Green Berets, whispered respectfully in the Race's ear. Then Bernstein cleared his throat. Doctor. Nash is from the Tactical Technology Office at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. He's come here seeking for us seeking our help. Frank Nash handed Race his photo ID card. Race saw a mugshot of Nash with the red DARPA logo on top of it, and a whole lot of numbers and codes beneath it. A magnetic strip ran down one side of the card. Beneath the photo were the words Francis K. Nash, US Army Colonel, retired. It was a pretty impressive card. It screamed important person. So already I'm excited to work out what that link is between the DARPA chapter that we've just had, where the guys were in and out in like 9 minutes, and what, all of a sudden this language university professor has got to do with any of this special forces nonsense. So, Race thought. He had heard of DARPA before. It was a primary research and development arm of the Department of Defense, the agency that had invented the ARPANET, the military-only precursor to the internet. DARPA was also famous for its participation in Have Blue project of the 1970s, the top-secret Air Force project that had resulted in the construction of the F-17 stealth fighter. In fact, truth be told, Race knew a little more about DARPA than most for the simple reason that his brother Martin worked there as a design engineer. Basically, DARPA worked in partnership with each of the 3 branches of the US Armed Forces, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, developing high-technology military applications appropriate to the needs of each force. Stealth technology for the Air Force, ultra-high tensile body armour for the Army. Such was DARPA's status. However, its accomplishments often became the stuff of urban legend. It was said, for example, that DARPA had recently perfected the J-7, the mythical A-framed rocket that would ultimately replace the parachute, but this had never been proved. The Tactical Technology Office, however, was the spearhead of DARPA's arsenal, the jewel in its crown. It was the division in charge of developing the big stuff, high-risk, high-return strategic weaponry. Race wondered what DARPA's Tactical Technology Office would possibly want with Ancient Languages Department at New York University. "You want our help?" he asked, looking up from Nash's photo ID card. "Well, actually, we came here specifically seeking your help." My help, Race thought. He lectured in ancient languages, mainly classics and medieval Latin, with a little bit of French, Spanish, and German on the side. He couldn't think of a single thing that he could help DARPA with. "What sort of help?" he asked. Translating a manuscript. A 400-year-old Latin manuscript. "Manuscript?" Ray said. Such a request wasn't unusual. He was often asked to translate medieval manuscripts. It was unusual, however, when it was asked in the presence of armed commandos. "Professor Race," said Nash, "translation of the document in question is a matter of extreme urgency. In fact, the document itself is not even in the United States yet. It is en route as we speak. What we would require of you is to meet the document at Newark and translate it in transit to our destination." "In transit," Ray said. "Where to?" "I'm afraid that is something I'm unable to tell you at this stage." Race was about to argue when suddenly the door to the office opened and another Green Beret entered. He carried a radio pack on his back, and he walked quickly over to Nash, whispered softly in his ear. Race caught the words, "Been ordered to mobilise." "When?" Nash said. 10 minutes ago, sir." The soldier whispered back. Nash looked down quickly at his watch. "Damn it." He swung back to face Race. "Professor Race, we don't have much time, so I'm going to give this to you straight. It's a very important mission, a mission that seriously affects the national security of the United States. But it is a mission that has a very short window of opportunity. We must act now. But in order to do that, I need a translator. A medieval Latin translator. You." "How soon?" "I have a car waiting out front." Ray swallowed. "I don't know." He could feel everyone's eyes on him. He felt suddenly nervous at the prospect of travelling to destination unknown with Frank Nash and a team of fully armed Green Berets. He felt like he was being railroaded. "What about Ed Devereux at Harvard? He's a lot better at Med Latin than I am. He'd be faster." Nash said, "I don't need the best, and I don't have time to travel up to Boston. Your brother mentioned your name to us. He said you were good and you were in New York, and quite frankly, that's all I need. I need someone close who can do the job now. Race bit his lip. Nash said, you'll have a bodyguard assigned to you for the entire mission. We'll pick the manuscript at Newark in about 30 minutes and get on a plane a few minutes after that. If all goes well, you'll have the document translated by the time we land. You won't even have to get off the plane, and if you do, you'll have a team of Green Berets looking after you. Race frowned at that. Professor Race, you won't be the only academic on this mission. Walter Chambers from Stanford will be there, Gabriela Lopez from Princeton, and also Lauren O'Connor, Race thought. He hadn't heard that name in years. Race had known Lauren back in his college days at USC. While he had studied languages, she had majored in science, theoretical physics. They dated, but it had ended badly. Last he heard, she'd been working at Livermore Labs in that nuclear physics department. Race looked at Nash. He wondered just how much Frank Nash knew about Lauren and himself. Wondered if he had dropped her name deliberately. The thing was, if he had, then it worked. Lauren was anything, she was street smart. She wouldn't go on a mission like this without good reason. And the fact that she had agreed to be part of Nash's adventure gave it instant credibility. Professor, you'll be amply compensated for your time. Not that. Your brother is also part of the mission team, he said, taking Race by surprise. He won't be coming with us, but he'll be working with a technical team at our offices in Virginia. Marty, Race thought. He hadn't seen him in a long time, not since their parents had got divorced 9 years ago. But if Marty was also involved, then maybe... Professor Race, I'm sorry, but we have to go. We have to go now. I need an answer from you. Will, John Bernstein said. This could be a tremendous opportunity for the university. Race frowned at Bernstein, cutting him off. Then, to Nash, you say it's a matter of national security. That's right. You can't tell me where we'll be going. Not until we get on the plane, then I can tell you everything. And I'm going to have a bodyguard, Race thought. You usually only need a bodyguard when somebody wants to kill you. The office was silent. Race could feel everyone waiting for his response. Nash, Bernstein, the 3 Green Berets. He sighed. Couldn't believe what he was about to say. All right, he said. I'll do it. So, yeah. So that was a really great first introduction, I think, to all of the main characters that we'll be meeting as we get along. Professor Race, how nervous he is about getting involved in all this crazy, wild mission, this really bizarre army colonel, and then all of Race's backstory all built into it, really nicely, that there's so much detail, the characters without even really forcing it through, which is just one thing I really like from all of Matthew Reilly's work. It's just how well he just develops those characters for you, and you can just really start to just build a really good picture up in your mind with them. Some books I find that really hard to engage with the characters in that way, just to kind of get a feel for them, and just maybe just build up that image in my mind, maybe is the best way to explain it. So I don't know about you guys, if you have that image already built up of William Race and how he sort of feels very shy, very timid. He's, a professor at a university, so that sort of evokes certain images already. And so hopefully, the character development just keeps going with it. A little bit more of the different backstories of the different people involved will be quite exciting. And just how they develop as people. So thank you to Hang Loose Goose for probably the best compliment I'll ever get on this. It's like Bob Ross but with books. So I love that. Thank you very much. So hopefully we'll keep painting these pictures then together. So next chapter. Race walked quickly down the corridor behind Nash, still dressed in his jacket and tie. It was a cold and wet winter's day in New York, and as they made their way through the maze of corridors towards the westernmost gate of the university, Race caught the occasional glimpse of heavy rain falling outside. The 2 Green Berets who had been in the office walked ahead of him, and Nash, the other 2, the 2 who had been out in the corridor, walked behind. Everyone was moving quickly. It felt to Race like he was being pulled along by a strong current. "Will I get the chance to change into something a little less formal?" he asked Nash. He'd brought his sports bag along with him. It had his change of clothes inside it. "Maybe on the plane," Nash said as he walked. "All right now. Listen carefully. See the young man behind you? That's Sergeant Leo Van Leeuwen. He'll be your bodyguard from here on in." Race looked behind himself as he walked over, saw the mountain-sized Green Beret he had seen earlier. Van Leeuwen. The Green Beret just gave him a curt acknowledgement nod as his eyes swept the corridor all around them. Nash said, "From now on, you're a real important person, and that makes you a target. Wherever you go, he goes. Here, take this." Nash handed Race an earpiece and a wraparound throat microphone. Race had only ever seen that on TV before, on footage of SWAT units. You strap the throat mic around your neck, and the microphone picked up the vibrations of your voice box. "Put it on as soon as you get in the car," Nash said. "Voice activated, so all you have to do is talk, and we'll hear you. If you get into any trouble, just say the word, and Van Leeuwen here will be at your side in seconds. You got that?" "Got it." And I really like this about with the Matthew Reilly stuff is, again, just that little extra detail of how that throat mic works. Just sometimes with all the weaponry involved with it, it's not really my thing or something like I'm into very much, but it just gives you those couple of extra sentences to explain maybe a little bit more about what that weapon is, or kind of what it does, how it's maybe different to something else. So we've already had sort of maybe 3 or 4 different weapons explained, like through the different scenes of it, which just for me, it is just a really nice little extra bit to kind of build up that picture. I really like being able to sort of visualize a book as I'm reading it. So again, just that little extra detail with the throat microphone, you can just see how the characters are walking through the corridor of this university, just how, Race is feeling at the time, like, what on earth am I supposed to do with this? And you just get all of that extra little input from it. They came to the western entrance of the university, where 2 more Green Berets stood guard at the door. Nash and Race stepped past them, out into the pouring rain. It was then that Race saw the car that Nash had said was waiting out front. On the gravel turnaround in front of him stood a motorcade. 4 police motorcycle outriders, 2 at the head of the line of cars, 2 at the rear. 6 plain-looking olive-coloured sedans, and wedged in the middle, cocooned by the outriders and the sedans, were 2 heavy-duty armoured vehicles, Humvees. Both were painted black, and they each had deeply tinted windows. At least 15 heavily armed Green Berets stood with M16s at the ready all around the motorcade. The pouring rain hammered down against the helmets. They didn't seem to notice. Nash hurried over to the second Humvee and held the door open for Race. Then he handed Race a thick manila folder as he stepped inside the vehicle. "Take a look," Nash said. "I'll tell you more when we get on the plane." The motorcade sped through the streets of New York. It was mid-morning, but the 8-car procession just raced through the soaking city streets, whipping through intersection after intersection, getting green lights all the way out of the city. They must have set the traffic lights like they did for the president when he visited New York, Race thought. But this was no presidential procession. The looks on the faces of the people on the sidewalk said it all. This was a different kind of motorcade. No limousines, no flapping flags, just 2 black, heavily armoured Humvees hovering in the middle of a line of drab olive cars, slicing their way through the pouring rain. With his bodyguard seated beside him and his earpiece and throat mic now in place, Race stared out of the window of the speeding Humvee. Not many people could claim to have experienced a clear passage out of New York City in the middle of the mid-morning rush, he thought. It was a strange experience, otherworldly. He began to wonder just how important this mission was. He opened the folder that Nash had given him, the first thing he saw was a list of names. Cusco Investigation Team, civilian members. 1. NAS, Francis K., DARPA, project leader, nuclear physicist. 2. Copeland, Troy B., DARPA, nuclear physicist. 3. O'Connor, Lauren M., DARPA, theoretical physicist. 4. Chambers, Walter J., Stanford, anthropologist. 5. Lopez, Gabriella S., Princeton, archaeologist. 6. Race, William H., New York University, linguist. Armed Force members. 1. Scott, Dwayne T., United States Army, captain. 2. Van Leeuwen, Leonardo M., United States Army, sergeant. 3. Cochrane, Jacob R., United States Army, corporal. 4. Reichardt, George P., corporal. 5. Wilson, Charles T., corporal. 6. Kennedy, Douglas K., corporal. Grace turned the page and saw a photocopy of a newspaper clipping. The headline was in French. Moins massacres dans un monastère à la haute montagne. I'm very sorry to all French-speaking people out there. Grace translated. Monks massacred in Mountaintop Monastery. He read the article. It was dated January 3rd, 1999, yesterday, and it was about a group of Jesuit monks who had been slaughtered inside their monastery high up in the French Pyrenees. So, thank you very much for pointing out how offended you are, Hang Loose Goose 162. I appreciate the honesty there. I would also be offended if I was listening to my pronunciation. I will try my best to do better. French authorities believed it to be the work of Islamic fundamentalists protesting against French interference in Algeria. 18 monks in all had been killed, all of them shot at close quarters in the same manner as in previous fundamentalist slayings. Race turned to the next item in the folder. It was another newspaper clipping, this one from the Los Angeles Times. It was dated last year, and the headline screamed, "Federal officials found murdered in Rockies." It said that 2 members of the US Fish and Wildlife Service had been found murdered in the mountains north of Helena, Montana. Both officials had been skinned. The FBI had been called in. They suspected that it was the work of one of the local militia groups, who seemed to have a natural enmity towards any sort of federal agency. It was thought that the 2 wildlife officials had stumbled upon some militiamen hunting illegal game for their pelts. Instead of skinning the animals, the militiamen had skinned the rangers. Race winced. Turned the page. The next sheet in the folder was a photocopy of an article from a university journal of some kind. The article was in German, and it was written by a scientist named Albert L. Mueller. It was dated November 1998. Ray scanned the article, rapidly translating the German. It was something about a meteor crater that had been found in the jungles of Peru. Thankfully, the German isn't written here, because that would be even worse than the French. Underneath the article was a police pathologist report, also written in German. In the box marked name of deceased were words Albert Ludwig Mueller. Beneath the pathologist report were some more sheets of paper, all covered with various red stamps. Top secret, eyes only, US Army personnel, eyes only. Race flicked through them. Mostly the sheets were filled with complex mathematical equations which meant nothing to him. Next he saw a handful of memos, nearly all of them addressed to people he'd never heard of. On one of the memos, however, he saw his name. It read, January 3rd, 2201, US Army Internal, number 139. From Frank Nash to all Cusco team members. Subject, Supernova mission. Contact to be made with Race ASAP. Participation crucial to success of mission. Expect package to arrive tomorrow, 4th of January at Newark at 9:45. All members to have equipment stowed on the transport by 0900. The motorcade arrived at Newark Airport. the long line of cars raced through a gate in the cyclone fence and quickly made its way to a private airstrip. An enormous camouflage cargo plane stood on the tarmac waiting for them. At the rear of the plane, a cargo ramp was lowered so that it touched the ground. As the motorcade pulled to a stop alongside the massive aircraft, Grace saw a large army truck being driven up the ramp into the rear of the plane. Led by Sergeant Van Leeuwen, he stepped out of the Humvee into the rain. No sooner had he emerged from the big black vehicle, however, than he heard a monstrous roar from somewhere high above him. An old F-15C Eagle, painted in green and brown camouflage colours and with the word Army emblazoned on its tail, came roaring in overhead and screeched to a landing on the wet tarmac in front of them. As Race watched the fighter plane wheel around on the runway and taxi back in his direction, he felt Frank Nash grab him gently by the arm. "Come on," Nash said, leading him towards the big cargo plane. "Everyone else is already on board." As they approached the cargo plane, Ray saw a woman appear in the doorway on its side. He recognised her instantly. "Hey, Will," Lauren O'Connor said. "Hello, Lauren." Lauren O'Connor was in her early 30s, but she didn't look a day older than 25. She'd cut her hair, Ray saw. Back at USC, it had been long, wavy and brown. Now it was short, straight and auburn, very late 90s. Her big brown eyes were still the same, though, as was her fresh, clear skin. And standing there in the doorway of the big cargo plane, leaning casually against the frame with her arms folded and her hips cocked, dressed in heavy-duty khaki hiking gear, she looked the way she had always looked, tall and sexy, lithe and athletic. "Been a long time," she said, smiling. "Yes, it had," Race says. "So, William Race, expert linguist, consultant to the Defence Advanced Research Project Agency, you still play ball, Will?" "Just socially," Ray said. Back in college, he'd lettered in football. He'd been the smallest guy on the team, but also the fastest. He'd lettered in track too. "How about you?" he said, noticing from the first time the ring on her left hand. He wondered who she'd married. "Well, for one thing," she said, her eyes lighting up, "I'm very excited about the mission. It's not every day you get to go on a treasure hunt." "Is that what this is?" But before Lauren could answer, a loud whining sound made both of them turn. The F-15 had pulled to a halt about 15 yards from the cargo plane, and no sooner was its canopy open than the pilot was leaping down onto the wet tarmac beneath it and running towards them. Hunched over in the drenching rain, he carried a briefcase in his hand. The pilot came up to Nash and handed him the briefcase. "Dr. Nash," he said, "the manuscript." Nash took the briefcase and strode over to where Lauren and Race were standing. "All right," he said, ushering them inside the cargo plane. "Time to get this show on the road." Well, I hope everyone is enjoying it so far. I'm certainly super excited and invested in it already. So I can't wait to be finding out all about this treasure hunt that Lauren's just mentioned. And hopefully it's as exciting all the way through the next few chapters as it has been so far. The giant cargo plane thundered down the runway and lifted off into the rain-soaked sky. It was a Lockheed C-130E Hercules, and the interior was divided into two sections: the downstairs cargo hold and the upstairs passenger compartment. Ray sat in the upstairs section with 5 other scientists going along on the expedition. The 6 Green Berets accompanying them were down in the cargo hold, stowing and checking their weapons. Of the 5 civilians, Race knew 2, Frank Nash and Lauren O'Connor. "We'll have time for introductions later," Nash said, sitting down next to Race and hauling the briefcase onto his lap. "What's important right now is that we set you to work." He began unclasping the buckles on the briefcase. "Can you tell me where we're going now?" Ray asked. Oh, yes, of course, Nash said. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you before, but your office just wasn't secure. The windows could have been lazed. Lazed? With a laser guided listening device. When we speak inside an office like yours, our voices actually make the windows vibrate. Most modern office towers are equipped to deal with directional listening devices. They have electronic jamming signals running through the glass in their windows. Older buildings like yours don't. It would have been way too easy for someone to listen in. So where are we going? Cuzco, Peru, capital of the Incan Empire before the Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1532, Nash said. Now it's just a large country town, a few Incan ruins, big tourist attractions, so they tell me. We'll be travelling non-stop with a couple of mid-air refuelings on the way. He opened the briefcase and extracted something from it. It was a stack of paper, a loose pile of A3 sheets, maybe 40 pages in total. Ray saw the top sheet. It was a Xerox of an illustrated cover sheet. It was a manuscript Nash had spoken about earlier, or at least a photocopy of it. Nash handed the stack of paper over to Race and smiled. This is why you're here. Race took the pile from him, flipped over the cover sheet. Now, Race had seen medieval manuscripts before, manuscripts painstakingly reproduced by hand by devoted monks in the Middle Ages, back in the days before printing press. Such manuscripts were characterised by an almost impossible intricacy of design and penmanship, perfect calligraphy, including wonderfully elaborate leading marks, that's the single letter that starts a new chapter, and detailed pictographs in the margins that were designed to convey the mood of the work. Sunny and gay for pleasing books, dark and frightening for more sombre tales. Such was the detail, it was said that a monk could spend his entire life reproducing a single manuscript. But the manuscript that Ray saw now, even in a black and white photocopied form, was like nothing he had ever seen. It was magnificent. He flicked through the pages. The handwriting was superb, precise, intricate, and the side margins were filled with drawings of gnarled, snaking vines. Strange stone structures covered in moss and shadow occupied the bottom corners of each page. The overall effect was one of darkness and foreboding, of brooding malevolence. Race flicked back to the cover page. It read, Narratio Verpristio in Ruris Incaris, Operis Alberto Luis Santiago, Anno Domini MDLXV. Race translated. The True Relation of a Monk in the Land of the Incas, a manuscript by Alberto Luis Santiago, dated 1565. Race turned to face Nash. All right. I think it's about time you told me what this mission of yours is all about. So we'll pause just there for a minute just to get the fire going again and make another cup of tea. So, see you back shortly. Okay, welcome back everyone. So now hopefully you've all got a fresh cup of tea, you're sat cozy warm, and we can carry on where we left off. So Professor Race and Nash have just got on the cargo plane. They've met up with Lauren and the rest of the team, and Race is trying to work out why he's there, what on earth is going on. So let's see if we get some answers. Nash explained. Brother Alberto Santiago had been a young Franciscan missionary sent to Peru in 1532 to work alongside the conquistadors. While the conquistadors raped and pillaged the countryside, monks like Santiago were expected to convert the Incan natives to the wisdom of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. Although it was written in 1565, well after Santiago's eventual return to Europe, Nash said, it is said that the Santiago manuscript recounts an incident that occurred around 1535. During the conquest of Peru by Francisco Pizarro and his conquistadors. According to medieval monks who have claimed to have read it, the manuscript recounts a rather amazing tale, that of Hernando Pizarro's dogged pursuit of an Incan prince who, during the height of the siege of Cuzco, spirited the Incas' most venerated idol out of the walled city and fled with it into the jungles of eastern Peru. Nash swiveled in his seat. Walter, he said, nodding to the bespectacled, balding man sitting on the other side of the centre aisle. Help me out here. I'm telling Professor Race about the idol. Walter Chambers got up from his seat and sat down opposite Race. He was a mousy little man, 3/4 bald and bookish, the kind of guy who'd wear a bow tie to work. So, just looking back at the list of people who are on the team. Oh, where's it gone now? Can we find it? So, Chambers, Walter J., he is the anthropologist from Stanford. So, hopefully he's got a lot of information about what's going on here. William Race, Walter Chambers, Nash said. Walter Chambers is our anthropologist from Stanford, expert on Central and South American cultures, Mayans, Aztecs, Olmecs, and especially the Incas. Chambers smiled. So you want to know about the idol? It would seem so, Ray said. The Incas called it the spirit of the people, Chambers said. It was a stone idol, but one that was carved out of a strange kind of stone, a shiny black stone that had very fine veins of purple running through it. It was the Incan people's most prized possession. Indeed, they saw it as their very heart and soul, and when I say that, I mean it literally. They saw the spirit of the people as more than a mere symbol of their power. They saw it as the actual literal source of that power, and indeed, there were stories about its magical powers, how it could calm the most vicious of animals, or how, when dipped in water, the idol would sing. Sing, Ray said. That's right, Chambers said. Sing. Okay, so what does this idol look like? The idol's actual appearance has been described in many places, including the two most comprehensive works on the conquest of Peru, Jerez's Relacion and de la Vega's Royal Commentaries, but descriptions vary. Some say it was a foot high, others only 6 inches. Some say it was beautifully carved and smooth to the touch. Others say it had rough, sharp edges. One feature, however, that is common to all descriptions of the idol. The spirit of the people was carved in the shape of a snarling jaguar's head. Chambers leaned forward in his seat. From the moment he had heard about that idol, Hernando Pizarro wanted it, and all the more so after the attendants at the idol shrine at Pachamaque whisked it away from under his nose. See, Hernando Pizarro was probably the most ruthless of all the Pizarro brothers come to Peru. I imagine today we would call him a psychopath. According to some reports, he would torture whole villages on a whim just for the sport of it, and his hunt for the idol became an obsession. Village after village, town after town, wherever he went, he demanded to know the location of the idol. But no matter how many natives he tortured, no matter how many villages he burnt, the Incas wouldn't tell him where their precious idol was. Then somehow, in 1535, Hernando discovered where the idol was being kept. It was inside a massive stone vault at the Carinacha, the famous Temple of the Sun, situated in the centre of the besieged city of Cuzco. Unfortunately for Hernando, he got to Cuzco just in time to see a young Incan prince named Renko Capac make off with the idol in a daring ride through the Spanish and Incan lines. According to those medieval monks who read it, the Santiago manuscript details Hernando's pursuit of Renko following the young prince's escape from Cuzco, a dazzling chase that wound its way through the Andes and out into the Amazon rainforest. What the manuscript also allegedly does, said Nash, is reveal the final resting place of Spirit of the People. So they were after the idol, Race thought. He didn't say anything though, mainly because it just didn't make any sense. Why was the US Army sending a team of nuclear physicists down to South America to find a lost Incan idol? And on the basis of a 400-year-old Latin manuscript, it might as well have been following a pirate's treasure map. I know what you're thinking, Nash said. Someone had told me this same story a week ago. I'd have thought about it in the same way you do. But then up until a couple of weeks ago, nobody even knew where the Santiago manuscript was. But now you have it, Ray said. No, Nash said sharply. We have a copy of it. Somebody else has the original. Who? Nash nodded at the folder in Race's lap. Did you see the newspaper article I gave you before? The one about the Jesuit monks who were killed in the monastery in the Pyrenees? Yeah. 18 monks killed. All of them shot at close range with high-powered weapons. At first glance, it looks like the work of your garden variety Algerian terrorists. They've been known to attack isolated monasteries, and their favourite MO is to shoot their victims at very close range. Sure enough, the French press reported it that way. But, Nash held a finger up, what the press don't know is that during the carnage, one monk managed to escape, an American Jesuit on sabbatical in France. He managed to hide upstairs in an attic during the whole thing. After the French police debriefed him, he was passed on to our embassy in Paris. At the embassy, he was debriefed again, only this time by our CIA chief of station. And? Nash looked Ray squarely in the eye. The men who stormed the monastery weren't Algerian terrorists, Professor Race. They were commandos, soldiers, white soldiers. They all wore black ski masks, and they were all armed to the teeth with some pretty awesome weaponry, and they spoke to each other in German. More interesting, Nash continued, what they were after. Apparently, the commandos gathered all the monks together in the abbey's dining room and made them get down on their knees. Then they grabbed one of the monks and demanded to know the location of the Santiago manuscript. When the monk said he didn't know where it was, they shot 2 monks, one on either side of him. Then they asked him again. When he said he didn't know, they killed the next 2 monks. This would have gone on until they were all killed. Someone stepped forward and said he knew where the manuscript was. And already that emotive, really illustrative description from the first chapter where we encountered that monastery and all the monks and those assassins is just coming back, and it's making me just feel sort of really like just sort of nervous and a bit frantic for what's about to happen. Obviously there's like really high stakes involved with all of this, but what exactly is going to lead to, and like why on earth these people would be at this monastery and why these assassins would be so ruthless with it. I'm just so drawn into the pages, and I just can't wait to just keep going. Like each and every little sentence, I just want to just devour it all up, just getting all of that information through, and really excited to just keep going with each of the chapters. So I'm hoping that you guys are getting really drawn into this story now. I'm really starting to root for all of the characters and find out where on earth this is going to go. Because so far we've got crazy armed assassins, some really cool historical story that's about to kick off, some physicists, there's all these secretive military stuff. It's just all like of all the spectrums of all the different types of stories all pulling in together into this one really, really great narrative. Jesus, Ray said. Nash pulled a photograph from his briefcase. We have reason to believe that this man was responsible for the atrocity. Heinrich Anastasi, formerly a major in the East German secret police, Stasi. Race looked at the photo. It was an 8x10 glossy of a man getting out of a car. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with short black hair that was brushed forward and 2 narrow slits for eyes. They were hard eyes, cold eyes that seemed to be set in a perpetual squint. He appeared to be in his mid-40s. Notice the left hand, Nash said. Race looked at the photograph more closely. The man's left hand rested atop the car door. Race saw it. Heinrich Anastasi had no left ring finger. At one time during the Cold War, Anastasi was captured by members of an East German crime syndicate that the Stasi was trying to shut down. They made him cut off his own finger before they sent it off in the mail to his superiors. Then Anastasi escaped and returned, with the full force of the Stasi behind him. Needless to say, organised crime was never a problem in communist East Germany after that. Of more importance to us, however, are his methods in other circumstances. You see, it seems Anastasi had a peculiar way of making people talk. He was known for executing the people on either side of the person who failed to give him the information he wanted. There was a short silence. According to our most recent intelligence, Nash said, since the end of the Cold War, Anastasi has been working in a non-official capacity as an assassin for the unified German government. The Germans have the original manuscripts, Ray said. How did you get a copy then? Nash nodded sagely. The monks gave the Germans the original manuscript, the actual undecorated handwritten manuscript written by Alberto Santiago himself. What the monks didn't tell the Germans, though, was that in 1599, 30 years after Santiago's death, another Franciscan monk began transcribing Santiago's handwritten manuscript in a more elaborate, decorated text that would be fit for the eyes of kings. Unfortunately, the second monk died before he could complete the transcription. What remains is a second copy of the Santiago manuscript, a partially completed copy that was also kept at the San Sebastian Abbey. It is this copy of the manuscript we have a Xerox of. Race held up his hand. Okay, he said, wait a minute. Why all this murder and intrigue for a lost Incan idol? What could the US and German governments possibly want the 400-year-old piece of stone? Nash gave Race a grim smile. You see, Professor, it's not the idol we're after, he said. It's the substance it's made of. What do you mean? Professor, what I mean is this. We believe that the spirit of the people was carved out of a meteorite. The journal article, Race said. That's right, Nash said, by Albert Mueller of Bonn University. But before his rather untimely death, Mueller was studying a 1-mile-wide meteor crater in the jungles of southeastern Peru, at a site about 50 miles south of Cuzco. By measuring the size of the crater and the speed of the jungle growth over it, Mueller estimated that a high-density meteorite, about 2 foot in diameter, impacted with the Earth at a site that sometime between the years 1460 and 1470. Which, Walter Chambers added, coincides perfectly with the rise of the Incas in South America. What is more important for us, Nash said, is what Mueller found in the walls of this crater. Deposited in the walls of the crater were trace samples of a substance known as Thirium-261. Thirium-261, Race said. It's a rare isotope of the common element thirium, Nash said, and it is not found on Earth. In fact, thirium has only been found here in petrified form, presumably as a result of previous asteroid impacts. In the distant past, it is indigenous to the Pleiades system, a binary star system not far from our own. But since it comes from a binary star system, thirium is of a far greater density than even the heaviest of terrestrial elements. Things were beginning to make a little more sense to Race now, especially the part about the army sending a team of physicists down to the jungle. And what exactly can you do with thirium? Race added. Colonel, a voice called suddenly. Nash and Race turned in their seats to see Troy Copeland, one of the other scientists, come striding quickly down the centre aisle from the cockpit. Copeland was a tall man, lean, with a thin, hawk-like face and intense, narrow eyes. He was one of the DARPA people, a nuclear physicist, Race recalled, and he appeared to Race to be a completely humourless individual. Colonel, we have a problem, he said. What is it? Nash said. We just caught a priority alert from Fairfax Drive, Copeland said. Race had heard of Fairfax Drive before. It was shorthand for 3701 North Fairfax Drive, Arlington, Virginia, the DARPA headquarters. About, Nash said. Copeland took a deep breath. There was a break-in there early this morning. 17 security staff dead, the entire night crew killed. Nash's face went ashen white. They didn't. Copeland nodded seriously. They stole the supernova. Nash stared off into space for a second. It was the only thing they took, Copeland said. They knew exactly where it was. They knew the codes to the vault room and had card keys for the clampdown locks. We must assume that they also know the codes to the titanium airlock on the device itself, and maybe how to detonate it. Any idea who it was? NCIS are there now. Early indications are that it might be the work of a paramilitary group like the Freedom Fighters. Shit, Nash said. Shit, they must know about the idol. Likely. Then we have to get there first. Agreed, Copeland said. Race was watching this conversation like a spectator at a tennis match. There had been a break-in at DARPA headquarters, but what exactly had been stolen was a mystery to him. Something called a supernova, and who were these freedom fighters? Nash stood up. What's our lead? He asked. Maybe 3 hours, if that, Copeland said. Then we'll have to move fast. Nash turned to Race. Professor Race, I'm sorry, but the stakes in this game have just been raised. We don't have any more time to waste. It's now imperative we have this manuscript translated by the time we fly into Cuzco. Because when we hit the ground, believe me, we're going to hit it running. With that, Nash, Copeland and Chambers moved off to other areas of the plane, leaving Race alone with the manuscript. Race looked at the cover page again, scanned the rough texture of the photocopier's ink. Then he took a deep breath and turned the page. He saw the first line, written in fine medieval calligraphy. Meus nominus est Alberto Luis Santiago, e il es meum riem. Translated, my name is Alberto Luis Santiago, and this is my story. First reading. Before we get stuck into that, I'm just going to enjoy a little bit. So I hope everyone's enjoying this so far. So obviously we've met the modern day characters. So where I mentioned in our little introduction about there being two storylines combined. Obviously we've got the modern day, and then we move into what we're about to go into of the first reading of the manuscript of Alberto Santiago's story. So personally, I find the two plots really exciting. You sort of want you get so invested in the one plot, and then you're also really, really excited to get back to the other side of it, and you just want to keep following all of the characters, which I think really helps move the pace of the book along. So and again, I kind of have, I think, said it before, but Matthew Reilly just does that so well. He just wants you to get through each of the pages and just get onto that next page in that next chapter, and you can't really put it down. I mean, we're sort of 55 pages into this book, and we've learned a lot about the characters. We've learned a lot about all the different kind of groups involved with it. But we've got so much more left to learn and enjoy, and yeah, it's it's so beautifully written, and I really hope you guys are feeling that as well, if it's your first time with Temple, or even a first time with just a Matthew Reilly book. So and if you guys are interested, I have a really unusual tea here. It's an elderberry tea, which I'm not usually one for fruity teas. I do like my plain English breakfast tea, but I thought it would be, as this is a day of first, my first stream, my first reading out loud of a book, I thought I'd try a new tea to settle in and get comfortable with. So I'm actually really enjoying it, which is good, because it would be disappointing if it was a terrible tea. And if anyone out there has good tea recommendations, I do love an English breakfast tea. I love Earl Grey and Lady Grey, and a green tea as well. So I would love to have some recommendations for new ones to try, and maybe we can sit and have a cup of tea together next time that you join in for our reads. So let's carry on with the book, and we'll jump into the first reading of William Race and the Alberto Luis Santiago manuscript. On the first day of the 9th month in the year of our Lord 1535, I became a traitor to my country. The reason? I helped a man escape from a prison of my countrymen. His name was Renko Capac, and he claimed to be an Incan prince, the younger brother of their supreme ruler, Manco Capac, the man they called the Sapper Inca. He was a handsome man with smooth olive skin and long black hair. His most distinctive feature, however, was a prominent birthmark situated directly below his left eye. It looked like an inverted mountain peak, a ragged triangle of brown skin that sat atop his otherwise clear complexion. I first met Renko on board the San Vincent, a prison hulk that lay out in the middle of the Urubamba River, 10 miles north of the Incan capital, Cuzco. The San Vicente was the foulest of all the prison hulks that lay at anchor in the rivers of New Spain, an old wooden galleon no longer fit for ocean travel that had been dismantled, dismasted, and hauled overland for the sole purpose of housing hostile or dangerous Indians. Armed as usual with my prized leather-bound Bible, a 300-page handwritten version of the great book that had been a gift to me from my parents upon my entering the holy orders. I had come out of the prison hulk to teach those heathens the word of our Lord. It was in this capacity as a minister of our faith that I met the young Prince Renko. Unlike most of the others in that miserable hulk, foul, ugly wretches, who, owing to the shameful conditions my countrymen imposed on them, looked more as dogs than men. He was well-spoken and educated. He was also possessed of a most unique sensitivity, the like of which I have not seen in any man since. It was a gentleness, an understanding, a look in his eyes that penetrated my very soul. He was too of considerable intelligence. My countryman had been in New Spain for but 3 years, and he could already speak our language. He was also eager to learn of my faith and understand my people and our ways, and I was happy to teach him. In any case, we soon struck up a friendship, and I visited him often. And then one day he told me of his mission. Before he had been captured, so he said, the prince had been charged with travelling to Cuzco and retrieving an idol of some sort. Not an ordinary idol, mind, but a most venerated idol, perhaps the most venerated idol of these Indians, an idol which they say embodies their spirit. But Renko had been waylaid on his journey to Cuzco, captured in an ambush set up by the governor with the aid of the Chancas, an extremely hostile tribe from the northern jungle that had been subjugated by the Incan people against their will. Like many other tribes from this region, the Chancas saw the arrival of my countrymen as a means of breaking the yoke of Incan tyranny. They were quick to offer their services to the governor as informers and as guides, in return for which they received muskets and metal swords, for the tribes of New Spain have no concept of bronze or iron. As Renko informed me of his mission and his capture at the hands of the governor, I saw over his shoulder a Chanca tribesman who was also being held captive inside the San Vicente. His name was Castino, and he was an ugly brute of a man, tall and hairy, bearded and unwashed. He could not have been more dissimilar to the young, articulate Renko. He was an utterly repulsive creature, the most frightening human form I've ever had the misfortune to lay my eyes upon. A sharpened piece of white bone pierced the skin of his left cheek, characteristic mark of the Chancas. Castino always stared malevolently at Renko's back whenever I came to visit the young prince. The day he told me of his mission to retrieve the idol, Renko was extremely distressed. The object of his quest, he said, was locked inside a vault inside the Coricancha, or Sun Temple, at Cuzco. But Renko had that day learnt, by eavesdropping on a conversation between 2 guards on board the hulk, that the city of Cuzco has recently fallen, and that the Spaniards were inside its walls, sacking and looting unopposed. I, too, had heard of the taking of Cuzco. It was said that the looting taking place there was some of the most rapacious of the entire conquest. Rumours abounded the Spaniards killing their fellow soldiers in their lust for the mountains of gold that lay inside the city's walls. Such tales filled me with dismay. I'd arrived in New Spain but 6 months previously, with all the foolish ideals of a novice, desires of coveting all the pagan natives to our noble Catholic faith, dreams of leading a column of soldiers while holding forth a crucifix, delusions of building high-spired churches that would be the envy of Europe. But these ideals were quickly dispelled by the wanton acts of cruelty and greed that I witnessed of my countrymen every day. Murder, pillage, rape. These were not the acts of men fighting in the name of God, and they were the acts of scoundrels, of villains. and indeed at the moment when my disillusionment was at its greatest, such as the time when I witnessed a Spanish soldier decapitate a woman in order to seize her gold necklace, I would wonder whether I was fighting for the right side. That Spanish soldiers had taken to killing each other during plunder of Cuzco came as no surprise to me. I should also add at this juncture, however, that I had heard rumours about Renko's sacred idol before. It was widely known that Hernando Pizarro, the governor's brother and chief lieutenant, had put up an incredible bounty for any information that led to the discovery of the idol's whereabouts. It was, to my mind, a tribute to the reverence and devotion that the Incans pay their idol, that not a single one of them, had betrayed its location in return for Hernando's fabulous reward. It shames me to say that I do not believe my countrymen, in similar circumstances, would have done the same. Of all the tales I heard of the looting of Cuzco, nowhere had I heard the discovery of the treasured Incan idol. Indeed, if it had been found, word would have spread faster than the wind, for the lucky foot soldier who discovered it would have been instantly knighted, would have been made a marquis by the governor on the spot, and would have lived the rest of his life back in Spain in unreserved luxury. And yet there'd been no such tale, which led me to conclude that the Spaniards in Cuzco had not yet found the idol. Brother Alberto, Renko said, his eyes pleading, help me. Help me escape this floating cage so that I can complete my mission. Only I can retrieve the idol of my people. And with the Spaniards holding Cuzco, it's only a matter of time before they find it. Well, I did not know what to say. I could never do such a thing. I could never help him escape. I would be making myself a hunted man, a traitor to my country. If I were caught, I'd be the one imprisoned inside the hellish floating dungeon. And so I left the hulk without another word. But I would return, and I would talk with Renko again, and again he would ask me to help him, his voice impassioned, his eyes begging. And whenever I contemplated this issue more closely, my mind would always return to two things: my total and utter disillusionment at the despicable acts of those men I called my countrymen, and conversely my admiration of the Incan people's stoic refusal to disclose the secret location of their idol in the face of such overwhelming adversity. Indeed, never had I witnessed such unfailing devotion. I envied their faith. I'd heard tell of Hernando torturing entire villages in his obsessive search for the idol. I'd heard of the atrocities he had committed. I wondered how I would act if I were there to see my own kinfolk butchered, tortured, murdered. In those circumstances, would I disclose the location of Jerusalem? In the end, I decided that I would, and I was doubly ashamed. And so, despite myself, my faith, and my allegiance to my country, I decided to help Renko. I left the hulk and returned later that night, bringing with me a young page, an Incan named Tupac, just as Renko had instructed me. We both wore hooded cloaks against the cold and kept our hands folded inside our sleeves. We came to the guard station on the river bank. As it happened, since most of my country's forces were at Cuzco partaking in the looting there, only a small group of soldiers were on hand in the tent village near the hulk. Indeed, only a lone night guard, a fat, slovenly thug from Madrid, with liquor on his breath and dirt under his fingernails, guarded the bridge that led to the hulk. After taking a second glance at young Tupac, it was not uncommon at that time for young Indians to serve as pages for monks like myself. The night guard belched loudly and ordered us to inscribe our names on the register. I scratched both of our names on the book, then when I'd finished, two of us stepped onto the narrow wooden footbridge that stretched out from the river bank, over to a door set into the side of the prison hulk in the middle of the river. No sooner had we stepped past the filthy guard, however, than the young Tupac whirled around quickly and grabbed the man from behind and twisted his head, breaking his neck in an instant. The guard's body slumped in its chair. I winced at the sheer violence of the act. Strangely, I found that I felt little sympathy for the guard. I'd made my decision, had pledged my allegiance to the enemy, and there was no turning back now. My young companion quickly took the guard's rifle and his pistolo, or pistol, as some of my countrymen were now calling them, and, last of all, his keys. Tupac then affixed a stone weight to the dead guard's foot and dropped the body into the river. In the pale moonlight, we crossed the rickety wooden footbridge and entered the hulk. The interior guard leapt to his feet as we entered the cage room, but Tupac was far too quick for him. Fired his pistol at the guard without missing a step. The explosion of the gunshot in the enclosed space of the prison hulk was deafening. Prisoners all around us awoke with a start at the sudden terrifying sound. Renko was already on his feet as we came to his cage. The guard's key fitted perfectly in the lock of his cell, and the door opened easily. Prisoners all around us were shouting and banging on the bars of their cages, pleading to be released. My eyes darted around in every direction, and in the midst of all this uproar I saw a sight that chilled me to my very core. I saw the chanker, Castino, standing in his cell, standing perfectly still, staring at me intently. His cage now open, Renko ran over to the dead guard's corpse, grabbed his weapons and handed them to me. "Come on," he said, awakening me from Castino's hypnotic stare. Dressed only in the barest of prison rags, Renko quickly began to undress the guard's dead corpse. Then he hurriedly put on the guard's thick leather riding jacket, pantaloons, and boots. No sooner was he dressed than he was on his feet again, unlocking some of the other cages. I noticed that he only unlocked the cages of Incan warriors, and not those of prisoners from subjugated tribes like the Chankers. And then suddenly Renko was dashing out the door with a rifle in his hand, ignoring the shouts of the other prisoners and calling for me to follow. We ran back across the rickety footbridge amid a crowd of running prisoners. By this time, however, others had heard the commotion on board the hulk. 4 Spaniards from the nearby tent village arrived at the riverbank on horseback, just as we leapt off the bridge. They fired at us with their muskets, the report of their weapons booming like thunderclaps in the night. Renko fired back, handling his musket like the most seasoned Spanish infantryman, blasting on one of the horsemen from his mount. The other Incan prisoners ran ahead of us and overpowered the 2 of the others on horseback. The last horseman brought his steed around so that it stood directly in front of me. In a flashing instant, I saw him register my appearance. A European helping these heathens? I saw the anger flare in his eyes, and then he raised his rifle in my direction. With nothing else to call on, I hastily raised my own pistol and it fired it. Boomed loudly in my hand, and I would swear on the good book itself. That its recoil almost tore my arm from its socket. The horseman in front of me snapped backwards in his saddle and tumbled to the ground, dead. I stood there, stunned, holding the pistol in my hand, staring fixedly at the dead body on the ground. I endeavoured to convince myself that I had done no wrong. He had been going to kill me. "Brother," Renko called suddenly. I turned on the moment and saw him sitting astride one of the Spanish horses. "Come," he called. "Take his horse. We have to get to Cuzco." That is the first chapter in the first reading of the manuscript. I think one of the things I really, really enjoy about this book and about this book so far is all the historical item of it, and how Matthew Reilly really manages to evoke that sort of feeling of how really horrible and awful the tales of the Spanish conquistadors and their conquest of Peru was. So you learn about that history through this book without even sort of realizing you're reading history, which I think is just so cleverly done. I think is really well intertwined within the modern day elements that we had through like the physicists and meeting the army and all of the assassins earlier on in the book. So yeah, Matthew Reilly I think does a really fantastic job of linking this all together and weaving it throughout the book. So yeah, it makes me really excited to keep going. There's plenty more of reading about the Spanish and the conquistadors before we go back to meet William Race on his journey on the way down to Peru. But I think for now, for the very first live stream of Temple by Matthew Reilly. That's all I'm going to take you through tonight. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I really hope you enjoyed some of the little Easter eggs that are planted through. So I don't know whether you picked up on the fact that William Race has a little birthmark under his eye, and there was a Spanish leader who had the same birthmark under his eye. So if you've picked up on anything else through that book, or if you've read the book before and you know of any other Easter eggs that are coming through, just get involved in the chat. Let me know what you think about it. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and I would love to hear your feedback, and I would really love it if you join me for part number 2 next time we stream. Good night.